Welcome to The Debate. For our show today, we actually used NotebookLM to synthesize a whole range of recent studies on how AI is impacting human cognition. The debate really centers on what some of these studies are describing in our brains, and it raises a pretty immediate controversy. Are tools like ChatGPT leading to a genuine decline in our mental functions, a kind of digital dementia, or are they actually supercharging us?
And that really is the central question, isn't it? Does all this reliance on technology and now generative AI, does it create a protective technological reserve for our minds, or does it impose a long-term cognitive debt that, actually degrades our ability to think?
Exactly. My position is that the evidence we have, especially the long-term evidence, it strongly supports this technological reserve hypothesis. I see AI as the latest and most powerful form of cognitive scaffolding. It's an essential tool that enhances our efficiency, provided we stay critically engaged.
And I come at this from a different angle. I see the functional benefits of older digital tools, of course, but I believe that delegating the heavy lifting, the core intellectual work of reasoning, to generative AI specifically, well, it leads to measurable and frankly worrying reductions in neural activity. So my stance is that this is creating a cognitive debt that risks eroding our ability to think for ourselves.
Well, the reason I'm so confident about the protective side of this is that it's grounded in really robust, large-scale longitudinal data. I mean, just look at the results from this huge meta-analysis. It pulled together findings from, 136 papers covering over 400,000 adults. Many of them were these so-called digital pioneers, aged 50 and older. And this research found undeniable evidence linking general digital technology use, so using a computer, the internet, a smartphone, with significant protection against cognitive decline. To be specific, people who engaged more frequently had a 58% lower risk of cognitive impairment later in life. Their risk was less than half of their peers who didn't engage as much. And on top of that, the rate at which their cognition declined over time actually slowed down. These are not small effects. They're comparable to, or maybe even stronger than, established factors like physical activity or education. I'm just arguing that generative AI is the next logical step in this evolution of cognitive protection. It's a dynamic scaffold that helps everyone compensate for human limits in memory or, cognitive control. And we even see this in studies on LLMs, right? They showed tangible benefits for problem-solving improvements up to 30% and a 14% productivity boost. The tool enhances performance. It doesn't diminish it.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the net effect is purely positive when we zero in on advanced LLMs, replacing that high-effort intellectual work, deep reasoning, synthesis. Sure, the digital reserve concept is valuable for maintenance. A digital reminder to take medication, that's obviously useful. But the real concern here is how generative AI affects active cognitive development and across the whole lifespan, not just in older adults. We have very specific evidence showing there is a measurable cognitive cost here.
What evidence is that?
Well, studies that looked at people using AI for complex tasks, like writing an essay or synthesizing sources, they found a profound reduction in cerebral activity and connectivity. We're talking nearly 55% compared to people doing the task on their own. To put it simply, it's like the brain enters a kind of intellectual sleep mode when it offloads that much effort. This huge drop in effort points directly to the risk of cognitive debt, a long-term atrophy of our mental muscles, especially for creativity, synthesis, and judgment. So, citing raw productivity metrics, it just isn't enough. We have to consider the risk that all this convenience is just promoting a kind of intellectual laziness, a paresse cognitive, where we stop reflecting, we stop verifying, and we lose that crucial intellectual friction you need to build real knowledge. And let's dig into that neural evidence, because that 55% drop in activation, that is a really crucial data point. We're talking about a significant dampening of activity in the very neural networks that are vital for executive functions. Sustained attention, working memory, the alpha and beta networks. If the tool were just optimizing performance, why would the brain reduce not just the cognitive load, but the fundamental neural effort needed to engage in the process? And the studies also show that while the AI-generated text might be formally correct, human evaluators consistently rate it as having less argumentative depth, less originality. So that confirms the tool is short-circuiting the deep, effortful processes needed for genuine synthesis and novel thought. And beyond that, researchers found that the subjects who got used to relying on AI, they struggled significantly and lost cognitive control when that help was taken away. That loss of function, to me, that points directly to dependency, not optimization.
That's an interesting take on the neural data, but I would frame it very differently. I'd focus on the quality of attention, not just the raw quantity of effort. I mean, the same EEG analysis you're citing, it showed a really interesting dichotomy. Yes, cognitive load, which we measure with frontal theta power, was reduced. The basic effort of, say, holding information in your mind was lower. But at the same time, attentional engagement, measured by P300 amplitude, was heightened. It actually went up.
So what does that mean in practice?
It means the AI is acting like an ultra-efficient processor. It's handling the extraneous stuff, the low-value mental labor like filtering information. So it frees up the user's high-level attention. You're not less capable. You're just delegating the trivial work so you can apply better, more focused attention to the core problem. Evaluating the AI's output, deciding what to do with it, focusing on the big picture. That's enhancement. That's efficiency. It's not a reduction in your overall capability.
But efficiency isn't free, especially if the effort you're delegating is what we call the germane load, the specific mental work required for actual learning and building cognitive resilience. And that evidence about the reliant group failing when the tool was removed, that's very hard to dismiss. It really does suggest substitution, not scaffolding. A proper scaffold is temporary. When you remove it, the structure underneath is stronger. Here, the structure just crumbled. When the brain adapts toward reliance, it creates a real functional impairment when that external aid is gone. That adaptation, that is the cognitive debt.
I understand the concern about dependency, I do. But the sheer volume of long-term evidence for the technological reserve model has to be our baseline here. Digital engagement forces complex mental activity. It promotes new learning. It facilitates social connection, all known protective factors. The longitudinal studies confirm that technology used at the start of the study predicted better cognitive outcomes years later, even when you control for how smart the subjects were to begin with.
Right, but that's a correlation.
It suggests a causal influence, though, where technology is actually fostering better long-term outcomes. Interacting with a modern generative AI is incredibly dynamic. It forces you to process new information structures, to quickly evaluate synthetic content. That is a powerful form of cognitive stimulation that encourages neuroplasticity. I just think the benefits of that stimulation and the enhanced productivity far outweigh these theoretical risks, as long as we maintain a basic level of critical engagement.
The problem is that the reserve data you keep citing, it mostly relates to generalized digital use, using email, searching the web, using a GPS. That is fundamentally different from the risk posed by LLMs, which specifically substitute for effortful, high-stakes cognitive work. Reasoning, original synthesis, complex writing. The reserve hypothesis is about maintaining functional independence in old age. The risk of cognitive debt is about the active development of cognitive architecture in younger populations, in learners. When a student lets an LLM generate their entire chain of reasoning, they risk the atrophy of the very cortical areas they need for critical judgment, maybe before those areas are even fully matured. We can't conflate the two. They're different things.
But the cognitive benefits aren't just about maintenance. By freeing us from that low-level cognitive friction, the LLM allows us to focus our mental resources on restructuring and critically engaging with incredibly complex information. The argument that digital tech promotes better outcomes because it's more dynamic than many analog activities is strong. I mean, isn't it interacting with a generative AI inherently more dynamic and more demanding of critical engagement than just passively reading a textbook?
The key word there is requires. It requires critical engagement. But does it? The critical factor, which you mentioned, is intentional use. Is it a scaffold or a substitute? The literature describes AI as a double-edged coping partner. If we use it to substitute for introspection, for example, asking an AI to turn our complex emotional state into a simple stress index, we risk a profound erosion of introspection. We're essentially outsourcing our resilience. That dependency undermines our psychological immunity, our self-knowledge. We have to be rigorous in making sure that AI acts as a temporary scaffold that strengthens our intrinsic skills rather than creating this permanent, debilitating dependency.
I agree with that entirely. The risk isn't in the tool itself, but in its passive consumption. So the solution isn't to limit access. That would sacrifice all the incredible productivity gains. The solution is to actively foster a critical, active, and demanding posture toward what it gives us. We have to use AI as a challenging partner, a multiplier that forces us to refine our ideas and confront our biases, not just as a mental crutch. And that's going to require significant shifts in how we educate people and how our organizations work. We need to build systems that actually promote intellectual friction and verification, instead of just giving in to the temptation of maximizing efficiency above everything else.
Precisely. If we prioritize speed and conformity in our educational and professional systems, over the demanding work of rigorous verification and deep engagement, then AI will just amplify that weakness. It'll accelerate a cognitive regression, not foster enhancement. The focus has to be on training augmented experts who keep their full intellectual control, not just creating assisted consumers who default to whatever the algorithm says because it's easy.
So we've clearly illuminated a crucial tension today. On one hand, the demonstrable, large-scale benefits of digital tools for cognitive enhancement and reserve. And on the other, the specific psychological and neural costs of cognitive offloading when generative AI replaces these high-effort intellectual tasks. But the positive role of technology in supporting complex mental activity and functional independence, that remains very strongly supported by the evidence.
And while that potential for technology to aid cognitive reserve is certainly real, we can't ignore the emerging evidence of this cognitive debt, this measurable reduction of essential neural activation when LLMs substitute for core reasoning. So the path forward, it requires vigilant design, it requires educational reform, and an intentional commitment to intellectual effort to make sure AI truly scaffolds our skills and resilience rather than replacing them entirely. It's clear that we need much more rigorous investigation to really understand the long-term relationship between these powerful new tools and the very structure of our minds.
This discussion on the cognitive impact of AI was brought to you by Le Podcast de Philippe. We encourage you to continue exploring these complex issues with us. And please help us to reach 2,000 subscribers by sharing our podcast with others who you think might value this kind of nuanced discourse.